example of that, because to my knowledge, and having been a scientist for nearly 30 years now, I can't think of a single case where the science community has suppressed knowledge that has never emerged. Now, intelligent design frequently claims censorship, but when challenged, authors, researchers can't bring articles they've submitted for peer review and the normal processes of science. And, you know, it's just not going to happen. The truth will out in science. The simplest explanation and the best explanation will always out, and that's been proven throughout the history of science.
But John's got a dossier of disturbing information in front of him.
I'm sure he does.
You know, this is right out of Francis Ayala's, you know, a evolutionary biologist and philosopher of science, and in May of this year he says the challenge for evolutionary biologists is to explain how seemingly well-designed features of organism, where the fit of function to biological structure and organization often seems superb, is achieved without a sentient designer. That is the challenge, he says. Well, now, he is essentially saying that the challenge to modern biology is intelligent design. And our job is to try to come up with a story that can explain what we're looking at without design. Now, that essentially invokes design as a scientific concept.
Okay, well, quick response. We're going to move over to Rick, who's in Kansas City North.
Sure.
Got the next question.
A philosophical statement by a scientist doesn't make it science or the grand challenge of science. If intelligent design produces good science, then it will be included.
Rick, your question, please.
Yes, I do. It's been a really great show. I really enjoyed it. My question is, do you believe that one can be a successful molecular biologist and disregard Darwin's theory of evolution?
John says yes.
Yes, I think so. At the science hearings that were held in May 2005, there were 23 expert witnesses that testified, and there were about 12 molecular biologists, biochemists, and they said, in our work, operational science, evolution is completely irrelevant. What we're trying to do is understand how these systems work and how we can improve the system, maintain it so we have cures for illness, disease, and stuff like that. And evolution is not really relevant.
Steve?
I'd like to agree with John. I think
Ladies and gentlemen, we've finally found an area of agreement, and you didn't think it was possible. We have found
I did say I'd like to, and
okay.
in fact I will. Belief systems, while motivating and personally fulfilling, are irrelevant to the findings of science. So whatever the belief systems are, or lack of them, or science is practiced all over the world by people with belief, without belief, different beliefs. It's still all science. So of course they can.
We have Mark from Leavenworth, who's now on the line. Mark, your question, please.
Yes, hello, thanks. I've often wondered why it is that some of the proponents of intelligent design don't point to evolution itself, along with the other fundamental laws that guide the universe, as additional evidence of an intelligent designer.
Well, I think the answer is that evolution is premised on the idea that random mutation produces a new variation which sometimes is positive, which the environment then selects. But the basic mechanism is a random mechanism. It's not a directed mechanism. It's an unguided process. And the question is whether that unguided process can explain what appears to be designed. As Ayala just mentioned, the system looks designed. So can random mutation explain it? That is the core issue right now in evolutionary biology. Can random mutation produce new variation?
Anne is on the line next.
Random is not mentioned anywhere in Origin of the Species, and it's another one of those words that has multiple definitions. Random to the intelligent design folks means, again, without purpose. Random to scientists means without discernible pattern. That doesn't mean we won't find a pattern in data someday or anything else. It's just right now we don't see it.
Anne, you've been incredibly patient on the line. I know we've got a lot of calls coming in, but your question, please.
Yes, on NOVA, they inferred that by fusing 2 chromosomes of chimpanzees, humans were produced. And I'm wondering if they have tried to do that to prove their theory. And I did have another question, if I could ask it.
Okay, let's get an answer very quickly to that one. Eric?
Okay, well, I think the caller has some misconceptions about the actual events, and that the fusion of 2 chromosomes leading to chromosome number 2 instantly made us human in some way. That would be a misconception.
John, did you want to respond?
No, I can't answer the question.
Let's go to your second part, Anne. What was that?
Did I misunderstand? Did the U.S. Supreme Court rule that teaching creationism was unconstitutional in the public schools? And I'll hang up.
Oh, thank you very much, John.
The Supreme Court ruled that creation science is unconstitutional in public schools. Creation science seeks to explain origins based upon a literal interpretation of Genesis. So it essentially seeks to promote the Genesis account that's contained in the Bible in a science class. And I personally tend to agree with that decision. I don't think that's appropriate. I think that creation science is extraordinarily different than an inference of design that arises from the data.
Steve?
And I think the thing that happened in the Dover trial was that they made a clear linkage to creation science and intelligent design, particularly in the drafts of Pandas and People.
I have to say, as somebody who is not a major science person, and never have been, you know, these conversations get incredibly complicated, and so the public is often left scratching their heads, really trying to understand everything that goes on. And some argue, actually, that scientists are partly to blame for these controversies over science because they do an abominable job of communicating their message. Now, it was a topic even picked up in that pro-evolution documentary film, A Flock of Dodos, that laid blame partly for the current conflict over science at the door of scientists themselves.
Will scientists adapt to this new communication environment, or will they go the way of species who fail to change along with their environment?
This is not going to be over for a long time. We've woefully undereducated the American public in the area of science. It's going to take a long time to overcome that.
And that was an excerpt from the movie A Flock of Dodos, Kansas Board of Education member Sue Gamble ending that clip. Are scientists partly to blame, Scott?
I think that any individual who works within the sciences has a certain responsibility to be able to communicate them in one way, shape, or form. I know that as I began teaching, I've become much more literate in evolutionary theory, partly because it has been in the forefront, and I have made it my own purpose to read more, to study more, to read more of the political aspects as well as the theological as well, simply because I will encounter more students inside the classroom that will pose questions about this controversy.
You're doing an abominable job, Steve.
Sometimes that would be true. No, I'd have to say there are notable exceptions. Science communicators like Carl Sagan who do an outstanding job, and we recognize those folks as really great communicators of the finding of science. But I think as a whole, it's really not a part of the training of a researcher. They're used to going to science conferences and talking to their peers at a very high level about very specific and technical language. They really never become good at translating to having a normal conversation. In fact, we're doing a panel at the AAAS, the American Academy for the Advancement of Science in Boston, in February on that very topic, communicating science, because the silver lining of all of this stuff is that the science community is now really looking at how we tell people what we know. And Kevin Padian said it in the Nova piece tonight that the reporters in the court were astounded at what we knew and the evidence presented in the trial because they hadn't seen it before. I think we need to do a better job of talking about what we know.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think part of that, though, has to do with the fact that the people involved in the trial, etc., went to school so long ago. And the fact that, I think that traditionally, like my own father, he graduated in 1953 when DNA structure was discovered, and that probably in the science classroom that he sat in, that he was being lectured to. And today, we have all sorts of resources at our availability. And I think in terms of, you asked earlier about has my teaching changed, and I said no in terms of the standards, really. But in terms of the resources available to me as a teacher, they're enormous now in terms of teaching this topic.